Hello and welcome to City of Brass, currently in early access on Steam. What is City of Brass? Well, it is a rogue-lite in a first-person style in an Arabian Nights kind of setting with a pretty interesting development pedigree. In fact, some of the people on the development team, that being Uppercut Games, are actually ex-Irrational Games, that being the, if you don't know, the people that made BioShock 1 and 2. Specifically, I think, are the people on this team. So that's kind of, some talent going on there. And in this case, what I'm going to be showing you is some early gameplay, just, what you are going to experience from the start, as well as I have some footage of me finally getting towards the end that I'm going to put in. That's of the new Catacombs areas that they just recently added in the newest, 0.2 update. So those are like levels 7 and 8 that I'm going to show you as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started in City of Brass. And when you begin, one thing that's kind of neat is this Divine Burdens idea, which is basically a sort of difficulty setting. You can choose from these, and you have to unlock them via doing various things. It looks like the Starbound symbol. You've got to unlock them doing various challenges, very much achievement-style things, and upon unlocking them, you can then apply them to any future runs. And they just make the game harder. So, Rebirth makes enemies respawn, Stout makes enemies harder to kill, things like that. And as far as I know, they don't give you any benefit in return, like, say, making you get a higher score, doubling the amount of gold you get, things like that. It's just to make the game more difficult for now. How this will advance later, I don't know, but I personally really enjoy systems that allow you to choose from a series of specific difficulties in order to also give you a bonus in return. I like things like that. As it stands, though, I'm not going to use any of those for this run. We're just going to jump in. So, you'll begin in the abandoned outskirts. And you may notice, first of all, it looks pretty good, and you've got a whip, which is very important. More on that in a minute. Also, there is a teleporter system, which is a bit different for a rogue-lite. Generally speaking, once you die, it's over, and then you restart from the beginning. In this case, when you die, you actually... Well, you do restart from the beginning, but if you make it past one of the bosses, which there is one every 3 levels, you can then restart from the next level after that. Which is kind of interesting. But of course you will be teleporting there with your starting equipment and no gold. So you'll be jumping forward in difficulty quite a bit in terms of enemy variety with very little equipment, but that's what this is for. You can find these chests, well, genies basically, that allow you to store equipment, which is pretty cool. And you can take the equipment out once you find that chest at the beginning. That basically allows you to gear up for a later run. So there's that. And here we go. Going in, the main antagonists of this game are the traps, as you'll find out. There are lots of enemies, but the traps will really screw you over if you're not careful. There's also tons of genies all around the place that mainly act as vendors. And you will get gold all around the place from just picking up loot, of course, and you can spend the gold on new items. And you also have 3 wishes, and these persist throughout the entire run, and you can spend the wishes to do something specific with each genie, and each one has a different result of actually expending a wish. For instance, this trafficker here, who is a standard kind of merchant type of djinn, actually enhances the rarity of his stock if you expend a wish. And here we go. This is how the standard kind of exploration and combat will function for the most part. You'll be going from room to room, killing whatever's in there so it doesn't kill you first, and trying to see what's available for you to progress within, finding chests and loot along the way. Now, okay, that's good. That's a new weapon, very useful weapon, does very little damage on its own, but forces enemies back quite hard and can do a lot of damage by just slamming them against surfaces and into traps and things. And I've also picked up an explosive pot here to toss at enemies. And some gold. Now, this whip is a really cool feature of the game, and it's basically... Ow! I didn't notice that. It's basically a multifunctional tool. In essence, you can do things like pull enemies towards you, so that they are killed by traps, like that. You can also use it to pick up items from afar, activate traps from afar, to stun, disable, disarm, and otherwise interact with enemies. So, for instance, if I whip someone's legs, they'll fall over. Whereas if you hit someone in the head with the whip, it'll actually stun them. Whoa. Okay. Ah! There we go. Hit his sword out of his hand. He loses his sword. Got a bit of Indiana Jones going on here. There we go. Although I've already taken 2 hearts of damage this run. Not good. There we go. This is a very useful genie. Gives you 1 heart of health for a nice flat rate, and expending a wish, like, triples the price, but will give you 3 hearts of healing for the price. Which is very useful. Come on. Up you go. Yeah. And there is little more satisfying in a lot of games than actually using traps and well-placed defenses against enemies. So an entire game that's effectively built around that idea is bound to go pretty well, I think. Oh god. And it does actually feel great. Traversing these areas and attempting to find, I missed, kind of new and inventive ways to screw your enemies over without actually getting in their way to kind of preserve as much health and safety as possible is a lot of fun, and there is full friendly fire towards the enemies. They can hit each other with all of their attacks, ramming them, slicing them up. Enemies that use magic and arrows later can hurt each other. It's pretty great, actually. And you even have a shove. And this shove can be used to shove them backwards into each other, into traps, into pits, all sorts of things. And it's all about just looking at your moveset and finding creative ways to use it. Basically, you're given what you need to succeed from the beginning of the game, and it's up to you to just find out the best ways to use it.
Wow.
So, from here, you can also do things like this. Yeah. Move yourself around with these, which is really cool, by the way. And gives it another kind of bit of kinetic feel, just like the slides and things do, but the slide does leave you a bit vulnerable if you're not careful with it. Uh-oh. You also can't really turn. Oh god.
Bye.
So, you can mess around with it like a bit of a trap-filled playground and screw the enemies over and make their ragdolls freak out. Which is fun. Alright, let's see. Now I've got the impact, strap of impact there, which is like a weight added to your whip that makes it do a bit of knockback, which is very useful. And there are some pretty fancy items later on in the game. Oh boy. I found a cuirass that shoots lightning at enemies whenever they attack you, which is very useful. A whip that is basically like a thorn whip that slows enemies down when you hit them with it, which of course is extremely handy. Whips that have a longer range, armor that takes hits for you before breaking. Things that augment your shove to do a bunch of damage or force enemies back really far. There's actually quite a bit of variety in the items. One thing this does, I suppose you could say, lack in terms of other kind of contemporary roguelites is a permanent progression system for the most part, where, you know, you finish a run, you unlock something new for the next run, like in Isaac where you get new items, and Gungeon where you can buy new guns with those credits, and, you know, things like that. Those are that kind of permanent progression system, separate from the in-run progression, is very common in games like this. This one doesn't really have that, aside from those burdens. That's about it, really, and those are really just extra difficulties for people that want it as difficult as possible. Nope. Oh, I got hit. So, but of course it is version 0.2. There's a lot of development to be done yet, but that would be definitely a suggestion. You also may notice that there's a time limit, and I'm spending way too much time in the first level. Usually I don't run out of time, but, you know, things happen when you're commenting. Oh god. Every level has a time limit, which mine is about to run out, and when you run out of time, a sandstorm happens. Okay, there it is. Lol. And when the sandstorm happens, the visibility goes down very low, which is bad, of course. There we go. Because enemies are, well, in a game where there are enemies everywhere and lots of traps, you want to be able to see where you're going, especially when you have to move quickly because the time just ran out. But, you know, you can take a lot of hits that you shouldn't have otherwise taken because of the rush due to the sandstorm, so you've got to be careful about that. And also, during the sandstorm, these unkillable sort of vortexes of sand can spawn that make you hurry up, and that's the rush I was talking about. So you've definitely got to be careful, just to show you what the wish does. There we go, turns them green, and you got some new stuff. I've never even used any of those. There's a lot of items, and there's also a journal that shows you the items you've unlocked. And there's a lot of trap variety in the game as well, which is cool because, like I said, all the traps aren't just for you. Every one of them has various creative uses and nefarious ways to be deployed against your enemies just as effectively. And there's a lot of enemy variety as well. Here's a newer enemy to show you. Oh. Actually, she's dead. That would have been a newer enemy. It's sort of a mage that fires these bolts towards you that you can actually whip out of the air. And that repels you whenever you hit her in melee. There's also an enemy later on that's very similar that fires fire bolts that home in on you. So yeah, this is how the game goes early on, and now I would like to switch to some much later footage at like level 7, past 2 of the bosses. I should also mention that the bosses on levels like 3 and 6 were pretty interesting. They're the same every time, unlike a lot of roguelites that have a kind of, I suppose, rotation of bosses. This actually has specific bosses that the level will always have, and they're actually pretty fun to fight. The level 3 boss, for instance, is always this shielded mage that's completely, oh good lord, that's completely stationary and will, oh no, yeah I'm screwed, and will fire these homing bolts at you that you have to whip back at her to take her shield down and then attack her. It's kind of like a Phantom Ganon fight going on. It's pretty fun, actually. Ooh, yep, got me. So yeah, didn't do very well that time. Let me show you some footage later on now. Okay, so here we are much later on in a different tile set altogether, the Catacombs area. This is the Restless Tombs. And I'm just discovering some of the new traps and items and enemies because it was my first time here. I've got to say, it's a very colorful game actually, and I really enjoy the variety in the game and the creativity in the variety. The creativity is actually, I think, something that is very important to it because it actually determines how successful I think the mechanics will be together. You've got the creativity of the enemies, in where even enemies that could easily be just palette swaps of each other and may even look like that at first tend to be so different that they're recognized as very different threats of each other. So, oh goodness. So even things like a kind of reddish version of a previously purple enemy isn't just going to do slightly more damage or anything like that. Oof. It's actually going to be a different threat in some way. It's going to do something different besides just looking different, which I enjoy. That makes every area something new to figure out, and that same kind of idea extends very much to the traps, because, like I said, the traps aren't just for you to be used against the player, they are for you to use against the enemies. They are a part of the game's sort of creativity and a part of its arsenal, I guess you could say. They're just as much a weapon that you wield as the ones in your hands. And the fact that every one of them actually does something when you use your whip on it means that they actually have to be kind of creatively designed to do something, to work. Those things right there, they're basically weeping angels. They're terrifying, and I wish they would go away. But if you blow them up, they will go away, so there you go. And that kind of means that every area is kind of an exercise in figuring everything out in a very organic and interesting way, which I think is very cool, especially for a first-person game where you can get up close and personal with everything. the need to figure it all out as you go is actually a lot of fun for me. And that's kind of an essence of a lot of roguelikes and roguelites in general, is that you don't know exactly what you're getting into and you just have to kind of try. I like that, and that definitely, that creativity is part of your arsenal as well. Most of your items don't have boring passives or anything like that. They're pretty unique, or at least interesting in the context of the game. You don't get a weapon that just does a little more damage or has, you know, some armor that gives you a little more defense or something like that. They generally have quite important and sweeping effects that will change the way that you play. Like this torch, for instance, does the same damage as the sword, but sets enemies on fire. So it changes the way that I play. It means I usually don't spend as much time on a single enemy. I usually just smack them once, wait for the dot to go away, and I'm running around the room and smacking every enemy I can as often as I can to just dot them up constantly. Oh, jeez. And that's a different way to play because you're equipped differently, which I think games like this should always embrace. So the sort of color and creativity is definitely one of the game's high points. However, if I did have a criticism, it would be in my kind of big suggestion. I like to do, if I can, like to find suggestions or just recommendations, I suppose you could say, for videos in my early access series, because I believe that's part of the point of a game being in early access, of course, is for the idea that they're looking to improve. They're looking for the opinions of other people, and although I don't generally like to suggest large sweeping changes to gameplay because I am not a developer and I don't have a full understanding of how difficult that is or may be to implement, so I don't like to, you know, completely suggest changing what could be the creative vision of the developer, even when I can't talk. But I do have one thing I think that is kind of fundamental to the gameplay of this game that I think may need a look at, or at least in my opinion needs some sort of change or alteration of some kind. And that is the speed at which you perform all of your actions. Your attack speed and the speed between all of your actions is very, very slow in this game. And that's actually, you know, I mean, if you think about any RPG, attack speed is like a fundamental stat. So obviously changing that across the board is kind of a big deal. But I think we're at the point in this game where it is so slow that it actually starts to feel unresponsive. Even though the controls themselves aren't unresponsive at all, it controls just like you would hope it would, it actually starts to feel unresponsive because of how slow it is at points. And it's often less how slow you are and more how large the gap in between your actions is. It makes me feel like, the best way I can put it is it makes me feel like I'm on an action budget. Like I have a very limited number of actions I can do at any given time because of how slow I can perform them, and so I must be very careful that every action I take is the most optimum one at every given time, because if it isn't, I'm probably going to take a hit, and you can only take a very few hits. You've only got 4 hearts, and once they're gone, you're dead, and you have to restart the entire run. So, I hate those statues. The idea is that the shove, for instance, I almost never use the shove, and that's kind of a shame, because it's not because the shove is useless. It's actually kind of a fun idea, and it's also kind of integral to the mechanics of the game. It's important to getting your enemies into traps, and you know, it's part of the whole idea that you are a kind of Arabian Nights action-oriented, swinging around with a whip, almost swashbuckling like. Doesn't have to just be pirates. Swashbuckling can mean lots of things, and but that kind of the speed that implies is not what you actually have available to you. So that shove is almost never used because I feel like almost any time I could use it, because of how slow it is to switch to doing anything else like a normal attack or running away or whatever, it is so slow that almost anything else I could do would be more useful than the shove. I feel like I have to contrive an instance where the shove is useful, like deliberately make a point to position myself in front of a trap at a very specific distance, make sure the enemy runs into me, but at a distance where they can't quite attack me before I'm able to shove them into the trap to hurt them with the trap. I have to like contrive that to be the case. It's not just a twitch, oh my god, enemies in front of me, hit the shove button to shove them away from me, which is what I feel the shove button should be. but it's so slow, and switching from, say, attacking to shoving, or shoving to attacking, or something like that is very, very slow, to where it feels like I don't even want to use it most of the time, because just attacking will get the job done. And in a game that has this many actions for you to use, and this much creativity for you to use them with, I feel like that's kind of a shame, and really isn't the way that it should be designed. I feel like the design goal of the game, the kind of hero that your character is meant to be, is at odds with the way that you can actually control the hero, if that makes sense. Like, the actions that you can do are at odds with the speed at which you can do those actions. And it kind of conflicts with the overall combat. You know, swinging your weapons, very slow. There are lots and lots of enemies though, so you've got to be really careful about which enemies you're swinging at to make sure you kill them kind of in a specific order, and twitch skill and just pressing a button very quickly because, oh my god, there's an enemy in front of me, all of a sudden shove them out of the way into that trap, isn't really a thing that can happen because of the speed at which these actions go off. So I generally feel like the kind of responsiveness between your actions needs to be looked at, because, like I said, it's not an unresponsive game, and the controls work just fine, but it's kind of to a point where your actions are so slow that it feels unresponsive, and that shouldn't be the case. There's really no excuse for it to feel like that, because the game is great, and the combat is a lot of fun, and what you're fighting is creative and enjoyable, so having this problem kind of drags it down a bit in a way that just feels unnecessary, since the rest of it is very well designed. But that really is the only problem that I have with it so far. Everything else is a lot of fun. Like I said, I do recommend looking into some kind of progression system if they want to do that. If they want to do a roguelite without a meta progression, that's totally fine. But if they do, I think there are some really kind of cool opportunities. I like those enemies as well. You can actually whip them out of the air and throw the entire enemy at other enemies, which is pretty fantastic. Like I said, a lot of creativity in this game. If you want to check this game out yourself, it is available on Early Access right now. It is $25, and I would recommend it. It's pretty enjoyable, and like I said, although there is that problem that I feel is a problem, at least, with the responsiveness and speed of your control of the character, I think that is not a deal breaker with how enjoyable and creative the content actually is, but I do hope that is something that is eventually looked at. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.